Thank you, Vina. Next up, we have a panel that will explore how humanitarian organizations are scaling their impact. With crises around the world demanding faster, more resilient responses, this session will highlight the power of cross-sector partnerships to deliver aid where it's needed the most. Please welcome to the stage Shaila, Manyam, Chief Operating Officer of the World Federation of Direct Selling Association, and our esteemed panel. A reminder that if you see a QR code on the screen, you can submit your questions in real time and our moderator will screen them and have them answered. Welcome.
Good morning, or good afternoon for many of you. I'm Shaila Manyam. I'm proud to lead the World Federation of Direct Selling Associations. We are a global trade organization that represents over $200 billion of business around the world, powered by 70% women. And what we're going to talk about a little bit today is that dynamic of global and local. I'm also a former State Department official and White House official serving in Haiti, Iraq, and Afghanistan, where I had the opportunity to work with many members of our panel. We're here this week celebrating the 80th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. In some ways, we've made incredible progress on peace, on reconciliation, and on understanding in those 80 years, but in some ways, we're falling very far behind. Over 300 million people around the world are in need of humanitarian assistance, according to the latest UN numbers. And if the need of people in need isn't growing, the amounts of contributions are falling drastically. For the first time, the OECD has reported that global humanitarian assistance funding has fallen by 7%. When you think, and this was already at a level where needs weren't already being met. And we tend to think of global assistance as remote. This is an overseas problem. This isn't a problem here. But let me tell you, this is a problem in our backyards as well. 1 in 5 children in the United States are food insecure. So as economies worsen, as climate issues increase, as global crises and instability persist, we are still going to have greater and greater needs for assistance around the world. And this affects economies, it affects societies, it affects stability. Those kids, for example, that aren't getting enough to eat, they're not able to learn. They're not able to sit in school. They're not able to grow and develop. So in other words, when assistance is at stake, our very futures as a planet are at stake as well. Partnerships have been critical in delivering, funding, and mobilizing even a fraction of what's needed. But these partnerships are even more crucial than before. Joining me today on stage are 4 of the foremost experts and humanitarians I've ever had the pleasure of meeting, who are going to talk us through not only some of the strategic goals around partnerships and humanitarian assistance, but also bring to the table the implementation issues that we are all facing. I'm joined, first of all, by Javier Garcia, the CEO of World Central Kitchen. Next to him is Ann Lee, the co-founder and CEO of CORE, Community Organized Response Effort. To her right, Rebecca Milner, the Chief Advancement Officer for the International Medical Corps. And finally, we're joined by Nate Mook, the CEO of All Hands and Hearts. Welcome to the stage, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to start first, Rebecca, with you, because we see health as the foundation of everything. It's the foundation of economies, of societies, and it's a critical pillar of assistance. IMC has worked in the field for over 40 years. How do you work and want to work with the private and public sectors to strengthen response, but also strengthen the systems in these crisis situations?
Thanks, Shaila. Thanks for the opportunity to be here to talk about this really incredibly important issue. As you said, we are all doing a lot more with less and trying to meet the rising needs. International Medical Corps is a global humanitarian organization, and our mission is quite simple. It's to save lives, relieve suffering, and build self-reliance in the communities in crisis. And so we do this through partnership, and we can only do it through partnership. Last year in 2024, we were able to reach more than 16 million people in 30 countries. So when I speak about partnership, I mean partnership on 3 levels. One is, I guess, the most important level, our operational and implementation partners. So this is the communities that are in crisis, and this is the systems that are in crisis. So as you all know, health is a public good, and healthcare is essential in crisis. And so we work with ministries of health and local health authorities and civil society organizations that are working on health projects. And we work with them to design our interventions so that we can be most effective and meet the needs that they tell us they need. And then the second level of partnership is really on the technical or highly specialized level. So we want to make sure that our programs are evidence-based and high impact for the people that we serve. And so we rely on our relationship with technical leads like WHO and CDC to make sure that we are implementing the health programs in the most effective way. But we also have specialty partners where logistics services, technology services, all of those things, and they're integral and usually private sector to our ability to get the work done. And then, of course, on the third level of partnership and funding is partnerships around funding and resource mobilization. And we are doing everything we can to reach out to new donors and current donors and continue to strengthen and build those relationships. And whether that's non-traditional institutional donors like members of the Gulf Coast, Gulf states, or private sector donors, and working with them to pre-position resources, whether it's cash or supplies, so that we can draw them down in the midst of emergency in a really quick and fast way. And so I would say that those are the 3 ways that partnership is critical to our work.
Thank you. And speaking of quick response, I want to turn to Javier because I've had the pleasure of working with WCK almost from its inception with your founder, Chef Jose Andres, who was an absolute stalwart for quick response in quick circumstances. And let's face it, we all hope we see a Nobel Prize in his future, if not in the immediate future, for all of his work. You guys have been one of the best, most well-known responders in crisis, in some of the most challenging situations. How have you worked with partners to navigate dangerous, difficult, challenging circumstances? And how can we bring in partnerships more to help engage and mitigate some of these challenges?
Well, our approach is everywhere is the same. We start by showing up, and we do in a way we do an empathy and ready to listen. And when you show up in a community, regardless the difficulties they're going through, you start learning very quick. Like Jose tried to say, 1 meal at a time. Not only where the challenges are, but also they're going to start telling you what the solution is. And that is going to lead you to which are the partners that you need to look for. And those, because the reality is that resources, knowledge, and talent are within the same community. We see communities not only a source of demand or need of meals, but also a multiplier effect for the resources that we need. So we don't see a partnership as something that we need to go after. It's an important part of what we do, and that's what we're doing today, starting in Gaza. In Gaza, we have cooked over 150 million meals. We are doing 400,000 meals a day, every day today. By the end of the month, we're going to be at 500,000. And we are doing it through partnerships with Jordan, with Gulf states, with our partners in Egypt and Lebanon, in Israel as well. Mm-hmm. So it is that complexity that when you look for the outside, it can be intimidating, but it's when you take it to the granular parts, 1 plate of meal at a time, you see the compounding effect of everyone, and that's when you see communities an intrinsic part of the work you're trying to do, and that's how we have over 100 community kitchens in Gaza. We've been, we've done the same thing in Ukraine with over 3,000 partners, restaurant partners during the beginning of the war, over close to 300 million meals. Again, you need to look, those numbers can be staggering, but you take it to the 1 plate of meal at a time. The compounding effect of, a small community kitchen in Gaza doing 300 meals a day, many of those is what take us to the 400,000 meals a day that we're doing today.
And if I can, I think one of the most important partners you have are local residents. I remember in the first days of World Central Kitchen, it wasn't just about feeding, it was about building the skill, building the capacity, and really kind of having that radiant effect. It
is. For us, it's always depending, whether it's a conflict with a hurricane, we always show up the same way. We show up asking, how are you doing? Can you help me? No, can I help you? and what do you know? And when you ask those three questions in that order, you start mapping out what is the response that you need to for that specific problem that you're trying to help with.
And I know one of your great partners has been CORE, which was just named the Philanthropic Organization of the Year by Hollywood Reporter. Congratulations, Anne.
Thank you.
With community-based support as your mission, how can partners work with you not only to build that capacity and provide relief, but also I think the fundamental thing that I loved about Chef Andres, about Sean Penn, about a lot of the founders of your organizations and partners on stage is this need to preserve human dignity in humanitarian assistance. How can partners work with you to do that, and how's your approach to that?
I think Javier kind of hit the nail on the head in that it's more of just sort of how we operate. It's going into a community and looking at it from the inside out, supporting the community to get back on their feet from the inside out. So we imagine our teams as surge teams to support existing community institutions. A lot of these places that are getting hit aren't necessarily experts in disaster relief, and yet you have librarians and teachers and folks that get out there to help their neighbors, and that's what we want to support. So we build up the capacity within those communities, in those, as a surge team, to strengthen their ability to give support to their families and neighbors. And for us, in terms of the larger community, for our partners, that we work a lot with everyone who's here, and I think we're all aware of the situation right now that we're experiencing. I mean, funding has been decimated, and now not only that, there's a huge amount of stress of competing in extremely large, complex conflicts and crises that are hitting all of us all at once, while at the same time, there's a cultural sort of war that's happening where there's a lot of isolationism and a lot of lack of sort of caring about what's happening. And I think partnerships right now is so important more than ever. And I'm not talking about people here, but out here who are sitting here watching this unfold. We all have a responsibility. This is the private sector to look at your operations and who is in your catchment area and what can possibly happen if a disaster could hit. I feel like we need to have a much more strategic way of working together, and not just in this nice and friendly way, but really putting your money where your mouth is, where we're all agreeing to work on a principled manner and put 1% of our own budgets as a nonprofit or a business to commit to very, very vulnerable communities that we see that need that help. Like, we need some real solutions.
Yep.
I have to say, as organizations that have been working in this field for 20 years plus, or maybe less if we're younger, but I do think that the system has created a really unhealthy sense of competition, because we're competing for very scarce resources. That's only worse now.
Right.
So if we don't get our shit together now, it's only going to get worse and more backbiting, and at the end of the day, it's the folks who are the most vulnerable, who are already at risk, that are going to suffer. So I use this opportunity to answer your question, but also make sure that we have a call to us as organizations, but you as folks who are also responsible to play a role in this really scary space.
And I love the 1% number, because just as a one fact, the total amount of humanitarian assistance in the world is less than 0.3% of global GDP. Think of what we could do with 1% of global GDP to put against those who need it the most. It's not only an investment in the present, it's an investment in our future. But I really kind of want to get back to what you were saying, Anne, about this idea of sort of collaboration and how necessary that is to move forward. When we're feeding people, when we're taking care of their health, we can't let competition get in the way of the mission. And Nate, I'd love to kind of turn that to you in terms of how All Hands and Hearts came together, because you were your organization was born of collaboration and of need. How have you navigated some of these so-called competitive landscapes? How have you kind of kept to the mission but been inclusive as you've implemented?
Yeah, All Hands and Hearts is actually a merger of two different nonprofits. Happy Hearts Fund, founded by our co-founder, Petra and All Hands volunteers, and we came together, and I think it's really interesting because we don't hear that a lot about kind of mergers in the nonprofit space. We do in the corporate world, but actually there can be tremendous value in doing that. And All Hands Arts was founded after the big tsunami just over 20 years ago. Petra's organization was founded to rebuild schools after disasters. Super important to get children back into school and look at the longer term recovery, right? Because too often all of this humanitarian assistance surges in the early days. And then when the media leaves and when the money dries up a little bit, you know, communities are left behind kind of struggling. And so you have to look at how you collaborate hand in hand with the local communities, with local partners, to build that sort of resilience of sustainability so there can be that longer term recovery, and that we have to think about it. I know Anne and CORE does this a lot with all of their work as well around the world. And I think, you know, I think it's important to recognize the moment that we're in right now.
Yeah.
Right? We are at a real transitional moment, and we don't necessarily have a clear vision of what's coming next, both domestically here in the United States and certainly internationally, with funding changes, with organizational structural changes, with a big pullback in a desire to respond to humanitarian crises. And I think the only way we're going to get through that and figure out what comes next is by working together. And again, I've had the pleasure recently of working with all of these organizations, you know, as partners on the ground. But I often think, as Anne said, it can be lip service, right? We you know, overall, we like to talk about, oh, we're friendly, but then at the end of the day, you know, you are fighting for kind of donor money and everybody's a little competitive and this and that, and there's a little bit of that that's good,
it's
right?
money and resources too, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the implementing that's always
Absolutely.
the hard
And
part.
I love this idea of the 1%, you know, could we put our money where our mouth is rather than just saying we're going to work together? Because it is, you know, this is a really challenging moment that I think we have no choice. Like, we really have to dig in deep, because the challenges that we're facing now are also bigger as well. I mean, the humanitarian crises in Gaza, in Sudan, certainly Ukraine is now 3.5 years in. How do we sustain ourselves and continue to support these communities if we are not really working hand in hand to do that?
And I think you brought up a great point about just the duration of these crises as well. And that kind of leads to one question I wanted to kind of ask the panel in general, and that's something I hear a lot now that I'm in the private sector. It's donor fatigue. It's this question, I think, from the private sector perspective of, you know, we want to do the right thing. We believe in corporate social responsibility. You know, maybe we'll give the 1% or whatever it happens to be. And ladies and gentlemen, if you heard it here first, the other 1% movement was born on the stage of Concordia. But how do you really address the issues of donor fatigue? I mean, in all fairness, corporate profits are kind of under the microscope right now. Even noble causes are having trouble getting the funding they deserve from the private sector, even if the will and desire are there. How are you, maybe starting with Nate, how are you kind of aligning with how donor agendas are changing, and what, you know, and really kind of almost, I hate to use the word educating, but informing them how assistance isn't just food packages anymore, it can be capacity building?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done. I think our sector, the humanitarian sector, especially on the private NGO side, needs to get better at how we communicate out there. You know, there was President Duque was here yesterday, and he was talking about how important multilateralism is, right? That we don't want to move to bilateralism, minilateralism, that we need this multilateralism. But as it's discussed in the realm of the UN and the international community, I think we need the same within our sector.
Right.
And as part of that, we need to collaborate and work together with donors. So it's not Rebecca or Anne going to a donor, but we can actually come together and say, look, here's what we're doing in Gaza. And actually, we're All Hands and Arts and IMC are working together with donors to get humanitarian assistance and nutritional aid into Gaza right now by working together, collaborating, working to attract donors in a way that they see, oh, wow, okay, look at this group of folks that are coming together. This is very powerful, and I think starting to kind of change the way people look at it. But it is going to take that, to me, what I think we really need to do is when we do approach donors, we have to be super pragmatic, super like understanding that with scarcity, we have to be more efficient. We have to come up with solutions that really also appeal to them. The last thing I'll say on this is we as a nonprofit sector also, and the humanitarian sector more broadly, need to embrace publicly the private sector. Private sector has always been a part of what we've been doing, from logistics companies to warehouses to restaurants in the case of WCK. But we also kind of like hide it behind the scenes, like, oh no, we're just nonprofits, and that's private sector over here. But actually, private sector has solutions. They have efficiencies. They've got skills, and we need to bring the private sector to the table, because the risk we have if we don't do that, then the private sector is going to replace us ultimately, and so we have to be careful.
Javier, how's World Central Kitchen been tackling that issue?
I think the approach for us is, I think, in some way, I think we as a sector are making the mistake of talking about our problems that we have as sector, as an organization, ourselves. I think the future it is that none of it is happening. It is we need to put at the center of the conversation the problems that we're trying to solve, because then you can get to our organization is not worthy of anything, any help, if we not talk about the problems that we're trying to solve. If we talk with our donors about how not only the problems that we're trying to feed in the people in Gaza, but how we're doing it, what it means to rebuilding the food systems in Gaza, what does it mean to rebuilding food systems in Haiti. When we put the conversation around the problems that we're trying to solve, the distinction between what are our challenges as a sector, as an organization, it also opens us to the conversation to that 1% that Anne was saying, that it's necessarily need to be a 1%. We start mapping out what is the problem that we are solving, and what each one of us can fill into the gaps. So we are not trying to solve the same specific problem. So again, is we bring the problem to the center of the conversation, all is going to help us engage with the donors about what is the impact, or they're going to see what is the impact on the problem we're trying to solve. At the same time, it's going to help us map out and work together as a sector in those specific problems. How can we, based on the specific expertise that we have, can fill in and collectively solve a problem that we are trying to solve in different ways?
And I think the whole problem-solving approach that you're taking is something that private sector C-suite can very much relate to. It's their language. So I think
I hope you tell the
so
story. For us, in our case, behind every single plate, meal, there's not only a story on the recipient side, but who's making that food, what community is making that food, where is that food coming from?
Exactly.
I think there's a lot. We center the conversation about, again, especially these days, about the problems that we're trying to solve. It's going to become easy to have the conversation with our donors versus if we talk about the challenge that we're having as a sector, as organizations.
No, I think that's absolutely true. Rebecca,
Yeah,
please.
and I would just add that, it's really important as we respond to these crises that we strengthen the capacity that exists in the communities. And so I think that, in demonstrating that and demonstrating the incremental progress that you're making by this rehabilitated clinic is been turned over to the community. These health workers have been trained. They're the ones that are maintaining the health services in their community. Telling that story is really important. So there is a lot of progress that happens even in these protracted crises. And you have to remember that you're saving lives every single day. And that is worth something. And even if it goes on for 10, 15 years, or the cyclical in and out of the crisis, I mean, it's still really important work. And don't be fatigued. It's urgent. It's urgent, whether it's in Sudan or in a place like Somalia or Haiti that have been in crisis for so long. But progress is being made. Lives are being saved. So celebrate that and continue to support the organizations that are meaningful to you.
And I'd add, just from experience, there's a real flex that can happen on a corporate side as well. I think about Cisco, or the fact that we pioneered QR codes to deliver assistance into Syria and track it.
Right.
There's
FedEx
a private sector upside to innovation
FedEx, UPS,
in all of this. And I
incredible.
think, Anne, you and I were talking about this yesterday.
When you were first asking this question, the first thing that popped into my mind was donors, gird your loins, okay? Because, I mean, there's a huge level of education that needs to happen. Like, you can't make, we respond to emergencies that are just symptoms of like a much longer, deeper problem. So if you really want to address those issues, it's going to take a few decades. It's going to take generations. And so that is a piece, it's a very difficult thing, and it's nothing new that we haven't recognized in our space. because we are human and we are like squirrels and we get attracted to the short-term dopamine hits. And I'd like to see like who in this audience is under 30 or under 40 even.
Show of hands.
Okay, so there's actually surprising a lot of you. So we've been operating in this like such an old school space of educating our donors and people that we're trying to get to care about. I have to say that you guys, I've learned so much from the folks here on how to storytell, how to get people to actually care about what we're doing. And so I'm grateful to that. But I think that we're in a brand new world. I mean, you look at Mr. Beast, who is basically everybody 1 in 3 people know who he is and love him. That is in the world, that is bananas. And his ability to distill information and have edutainment, to me, is something that we are completely missing. You know, you look at USAID completely being decimated, FEMA getting decimated, and there is not a single sound being made in the general public because we have failed in telling the story of how important it is to care about these things. And so we need to think about sort of what it is that we need people to care about, but do it in a way that is relevant to, you know, the 20 people, young people that are in this room and seed that information.
Well, we have an audience of 193 world leaders in town this week, and to that point, like, you know, one word each. How do we get that point across? What's the word you want them to leave with to really kind of move those hearts and minds?
Who's first?
Well, I think in our case, you know, it is important to go back to the problems that we're trying to solve, because if not, you know, you can have the commitment doesn't mean anything, right? We just want to support you as a sector doesn't mean anything for the people we're trying to help. I think we need to understand why we are here today. We are not here, you know, as a sector, as organizations. We're trying to solve problems. I think it's, you know, the problem the people in Gaza are having are different than the problems that the people of Haiti are having, or people of Ukraine.
So understanding the problem.
Understanding the problem.
Anne?
We need a revolution.
All right.
I mean, there are no humanitarian solutions to humanitarian problems, only political ones, so get to work.
All right. Policy.
First, I'm joining Anne's revolution, first of all.
The 1% revolution.
Yes, the 1% revolution. Inclusivity. We need to make this sector inclusive. It's for too long. There's been high and mighty, you know, we're, you know, in our office building somewhere. Like, we need to sit down and welcome everybody to the table that has ideas, private sector, nonprofit, government, and come up with new things. And it's only going to do that. We have to get back to the roots and the local communities and be inclusive.
All right. World leaders, you've heard it here. We're coming for you. There's a 1% revolution happening and people are in need, but we have the capability to come to action and do something about it. Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists today. Thank you to this wonderful audience in the room and watching online. Please go out and do something to make the world better today. Thank you.
Thank you.